here's some news articles I thought were important. This one was very interesting. Everybody's talking about NFTs, which are supposed to be original works of art that come with a certificate to prove that you have the original and are therefore collector's items. But this guy looked into the technical details, and they are amazing. I just assumed, of course, that the way you registered the art for digital artwork would be something like a SHA-512 hash stored on the blockchain so that it uniquely identifies the art. But that is not what the NFTs are. And the NFT that just sold for like $69 million is an example. What's actually on the blockchain is a URL to one company's page, which is full of JSON, which contains the hash. So when that company goes out of business, or if it gets hacked, that contents will change. They didn't actually store a unique identifier of the object on the blockchain, which completely undoes the entire good of this. So, and apparently this has already begun, that as they change the contents of servers and servers crash and stuff, the NFTs you bought to have permanent ownership with are gone. So like everything else on the blockchain, they rushed something out without thinking it through because it's all a scam. I mean, the point is to burn some people by selling them some junk and running away with the money before they realize it's junk, which is essentially every blockchain project ever. So anyway, that's very interesting. And of course, you could make a superior form of NFT that actually stores the hash on the blockchain or something, but you know, like I say, if you want a collector's item, you can do what museums have done for centuries and just get a certificate of authenticity from an expert in the art or something. The blockchain doesn't really add much of anything here, except another way to confuse people with complexity and pick their pocket while they're guessing. Anyway, I'm looking at my Twitch and trying to see if I can get it to show me the chat. As usual, it's showing me weird junk instead of the chat. There's the chat. I tried to install Ettercap Graphical. Yeah, I've never been able to get Ettercap to work. There are people who love it, but I've never been able to get any version of Ettercap to work in years. There's a product called BetterCap that some people have made to try to deal with that. Ettercap has never worked for me. I must have been trying for 10 years. And I find tutorials and follow them and they don't work. You got me. I could never make it work either. I just use other things like Burp. Another tool that works very well is Cane. Cane on Windows is a wonderful art poisoning tool that will do what Ettercap does, and it works very well. That's a good question. Anyway, this object hit the place, and a Harvard scientist actually wrote a book saying he thinks it's an alien artifact because of the way it moves. And these guys finally figured out it's a chunk of ice. It's made out of nitrogen ice, so that when it gets close to the sun, it boils off rapidly, and that creates what appears to be thrust. So that made people think it had an engine. It was a spaceship. But they figured out it's just a block of nitrogen ice. So that makes a lot more sense. HBO has a series about QAnon, and they believe they've discovered Q's identity, and they just say the same thing that most of us have thought for years. One of the guys that ran 8kun is Q, which is kind of the point. It was always pretty obvious. So anyway, on it goes. This, of course, will have no effect on the true believers. But anyway, if anybody actually wants the truth, it's pretty easy to spot. At least likelihood. You don't really know, of course. This one is amazing. Every car is reporting your location back all the time to some kind of home base. And the home bases are collecting it and selling it to anybody that wants to have it, just like your advertising clicks and many other things about what you're doing. So now it was a surveillance contractor that sold to the military is now advertising a product that will locate cars anywhere in any country except North Korea and some other country. And they have maps here showing thousands of cars in other countries. So this data is for sale, which is true of all the privacy advocates will tell you this stuff. That a ton of private information is out there for sale, and government agencies and police agencies and advertisers and everybody is just buying it. This was interesting. There's a threat matrix for Kubernetes, which I found out at GrimCon today, which is like the attack matrix. listing all the various types of attacks and weaknesses that can cause them. So this is the beginning to try to organize these things. Yeah, glad you have an old car. Yeah, I think my car is probably too old too. There's a new car insurance called Metromile, and I found out my car is so old it would be hard to install the Metromile gizmo. So anyway, that involves picking a gizmo in your car to report back to the insurance company, and then you get cheap insurance because they can actually check and make sure you're not speeding and stuff. Anyway, this amazed me. I was doing easy Pico Capture the Flag is up, by the way. I should mention this. Pico Capture the Flag is up. I highly encourage you to do it. It's very fun. So I was solving an RSA challenge here, and I tried to open Python and paste some lines in, and I couldn't paste multiple lines into the terminal. It would just have a problem with it. And I found out this has been a known error in Python installed on Mac since the beginning of 2020. And you have to execute this strange command line thing to turn off something called bracketed paste, or you can't paste more than one line at a time into a Python interpreter. So anyway, I'm glad I found it, and it might affect any students trying to use Python. So Andrew Como has got a whole bunch of, I think it looks to me like the volume on my microphone is too high. I keep seeing the red there. Let me just pause and see if I can figure out properties. Now I figured out how to turn up the volume once before. Properties, nope, but now I can't find it. Somebody told me it was too quiet, and I turned it up, and now I can't figure out how to turn it down. Oh well, maybe it'll be all right. I've been using it this way for a while. Anyway, as far as the Drozer Rogue agent, where will we install it? In the VM or Kali? The Drozer agent goes on the Android device. Okay, seems okay. Thanks for telling me. Good, because I can't figure out how to turn it down anyway. So anyway, Andrew Cuomo's in big trouble. A whole bunch of women have come and said he's like sexually harassed them, and now he's sending people to to defame the people and intimidate people into saying bad things about them and such. This is very much a Bill Clinton playbook. So that's why the president came out and said he probably should resign if any of this is true, and he's probably going to have criminal charges. So we'll see. Apparently everybody hates Cuomo. He's been running a bullying, nasty place. He's considered the Democrats' closest analog to Trump. Just nasty and egotistical and abusing the people around him. So this should do something. You know, Uber's whole thing in America is they have to pay the drivers almost nothing and give them no benefits, or their whole business model would collapse. But now, in Britain, they get the minimum wage, holiday pay, and pensions, and they said the price for rides will not go up. So that kind of puts the lie to all their claims that we couldn't give drivers the same benefits here or it would ruin the whole game. So we'll see what comes of that. Anyway, and just a little bit, right. So the intelligence report came out, which said that China did not interfere with our election, but Russia did, even more than they did in 2016, they did in 2020. And they used Trump allies like Rudy Giuliani, and of course Ron Johnson was known all along. He would take stuff that he was told was Russian disinformation and publish it as news, and that's what Rudy Giuliani was doing. All that false stuff about Hunter Biden and Estonia was all straight Russian disinformation being laundered through Trump allies to spread out and poison thought in America. So it's all come out. It's pretty damning stuff. It's very clear. It contradicts the whole party line of Trump, which is that China is hacking the election, which was a very strange thing to say. And China kept saying, we don't care about your election. Will Stephen Booth be free to talk about what he knows about SolarWinds now? Well, I have no idea about his situation in particular, but I just signed another NDA last week, and I can tell you an NDA holds for 5 years after you leave the company. So if he has a legal obligation not to talk about things, that will persist for years, which makes sense anyway. Anyway, and FireEye has monthly threat briefings. I listened to one of these and it was very good, so I put them all on my webpage. I recommend them. If you go to these things, it's worth extra credit. So you see how much every month they have one of these. It's about an hour. It's very interesting. You're not? No, I'm not. I'm not going away. I do consulting jobs. No, it doesn't mean I'm quitting. The college is apparently going to survive, and they can't fire me even if they want to. Of course, I signed an NDA because I got a consulting job, but it doesn't mean I'm leaving the college. No, you always have to sign NDAs. I've even made my students sign NDAs in some of my classes where I drop unpublished vulnerabilities. You have to sign a lot of NDAs in this business, so don't. It's something to get used to. Yeah, but I did sign an NDA because what happens when you get a consulting job, they'll usually make you sign an NDA before they even tell you anything. Because, you have to be legally bound not to talk about it. Because, everybody has got proprietary secrets. If they're developing something, then they don't want their competitors to know what they're developing. So this is really common in the business. Any kind of consulting you do, you sign non-disclosure agreements. Sometimes when I went to Pacific Hackers down south, we would meet in a company's building, and you actually had to sign an NDA just to walk into the building, in case you'll look up and see something on the blackboard. You're not allowed to tell anybody what you might see. In fact, this is how we ended up with Microsoft Windows. IBM needed an operating system, and they first went to Steve Jobs, and they marched in with a bunch of lawyers and an NDA, and they said, we can't talk to you until you sign this document. And Steve Jobs looked at it and said, I'm not signing that document, get out of here. So they left and went to Bill Gates and bought the operating system from them, because Bill Gates was happy to play along with any of that stuff, because he could see that he could position Microsoft where everybody would need him. And Steve Jobs was more of sort of a hippie that didn't like any of this corporate lawyer, scary, nasty, mean stuff. He had a whole different attitude of what Apple should be than that, and he told him to take a hike. Anyway, so we're down to Android implementation issues. So we'll talk about pre-installed applications, which is one thing that we can't test on these emulators, and then the start of the exploiting devices. And there's more sections coming after this. So each installed app, of course, has its own attack surface. It has some way for data to come into the app. It might even have a listening network port or something. And so if you find a vulnerability to where you can trick the app into doing something, it can only act with its own privileges. So you get the privileges of the app and probably not root access, unless you have a phone that has something installed on it that's running as root, which has happened. All right. And you can, all right. So anyway, you can often exfiltrate user data from that app without root access. I see Rainbow Cache is back. Anyway, all right. So you want to find your powerful packages. Now, it might have root access, but it's more likely to have install packages. If they want to have the app update itself, then it has to have the ability to install packages, and that means it can install other packages. So you can run Drozer, and you can check to see which apps have the install package permission, and you'll see it's the Google Play Store, package installer, and a few others. Nothing too nasty on this emulator. Now, the emulators are just naked Android systems. They just have the essential Android system software and then whatever apps you put on them. But when you buy a real phone, it comes with all kinds of apps put on by the developer, like Samsung or something. And those are often where you have the real vulnerabilities. So these emulators don't really show you all the fun stuff you'll find on real devices. And so on an emulator, you look at the apps running a system, and I only found a few, but there are 66 in the book running on a real device. All right, so you want to find some remote attack vectors. Of course, the most common one, and the one we talk about most, is just tricking the user into installing a malicious app, which is very easy, especially in China, where they block the Google Play Store, so everybody has to install stuff from unauthorized app stores. And as we've seen, they don't clean the Google Play Store very well anyway, so you can in fact slip malware into the Google Play Store. So that's one way. Then if you have a listening port, you can exploit something. On the client side, another thing you often do is get it to open a malicious document. That's why a lot of the Android jailbreaks involve opening a web page or a PDF file, which is the easiest way to run code on the machine if you have a vulnerability in that displayer. So these are very often vulnerable. And the same thing's true, by the way, of Microsoft Office. I just saw a talk at GrimCon about all the vulnerabilities that are still in Microsoft Office documents. It's one of the common vectors to take over a box. So anyway, these things typically have parsers that are written in the native library like C or C++, and they make mistakes in the parsers, so you can sneak through unexpected characters. Samsung had a vulnerable PDF viewer. On my emulator, there's no PDF reader at all. And, Adobe PDF Reader has been a very popular way to take over Windows-based machines for decades. It tends to have a lot of vulnerabilities, like Flash, which is now finally gone. Now, browsable activities are things that can open content inside an app instead of the browser, which we've talked about before. Are Adobe products now safe? That's a very good question. And I do not know for sure. I know they had a terrible reputation for years, and they supposedly improved them. I just don't remember as many headlines in the last year or two about Adobe being ridiculously unsafe, so I guess they're better. Yeah, no more Flash, supposedly. And they're still in the PDF reader, though, and I think I've seen some PDF exploits, but I'm not sure I've seen a good one in the last year. So I think Adobe is better than it used to be, anyway. I'm not sure I'd go so far as to say it's safe, though. But I think they're improving. It's a very good question. Client-side Java is pretty terrible, too, and they've improved a little. Anyway, these browsable activities are things that will let you open something like a web page inside the app, which I talked about is commonly done to make an app prettier. And so you can find them. You can look in the manifest file, and you will see that this pwn activity is browsable. So opening a link with pwn will open inside there. But you can't open these schemas from an iframe anymore. You remember I tried that last time. There was a activity that would dial a special number on the phone and open a a configuration page, and I couldn't open it automatically in an iframe anymore because they blocked that. I had to get the user to click on a link, which is a little bit better. All right, so you can have, you click on a link to open it, or you can do it with an intent, pwn, or what's called a web intent, both of which do the same thing. That launches a pwn activity on the phone, which will only be able to launch if something will handle that schema. But a lot of apps use the browsable filter. You can run a scanner, activity browsable, and Drozer will find all the browsable activities. And as you see, the Fidelity app is using it, and the Blackboard app is using it. A lot of things use browsable filters, which means they open something inside the app, like a web page. I found a lot of apps like to do that, and it does mean if you take over a security model of handling the security of web traffic, which many apps are not really up to. And like I said, some people have custom update mechanisms. This, by the way, is how Apple lost their no viruses selling point. Until about 6 years ago, Apple's had a website advertising Apple, and one of the things was no viruses. But then Adobe, I think it was Adobe PDF, had updates. And it would keep on flashing up a box saying time for an update, and Apple didn't like that, so they blocked that and forced it to go through the Apple official updater, which was slow, and they blocked an update for 6 weeks, and then they got viruses, and they had to take down that note. But people do write their own update mechanisms rather than using the Play Store, and if you're going to do that, now your app has the ability to install packages. So if there's a vulnerability in your app, you've now made it possible to use your app as a gateway to install malware. So this is a lot like deciding to open web pages inside your app. You have taken a responsibility on yourself that you might not be ready for. Now here's an article about Flash. Let's see. Okay, InfoWorld. Yeah, that's right. Adobe Flash. Insecure, outdated, and here to stay. Yes, they're trying to get rid of it. It's very insecure, but a lot of people continue to use it. Yeah, anyway. All right, and so there are ways to remote load code. You can use the Dex class loader, and this will load classes containing a class. You can use this to execute code, so you can add more code from a remote source to your app while it runs. This is kind of amazing, and notice it will download the code and then run it. And they warn you, don't download the code onto external storage like the SD card, because something else could write different code on it, and then it would run that. This is a spectacularly dangerous activity, but it's there, loading new code at runtime. This is kind of like the way Windows loads DILs, which we were just exploiting in the workshop we did at GrimCon, and it's in the 126 class here. The way Windows loads libraries is very similar. You're running an app, and then it goes and fetches other code from somewhere else, just sticks it in and runs it, without knowing whether it's really the right code or valid or malicious or anything. So this is the DEX class loader thing using Java reflection, that an app can load new code over the network, or from a local location, like an SD card that might be overwritten by something else. So this would give you an opportunity for code injection. All right, and web views, which is what I've said all along, this is when you put a little browser inside your app, and now you open web pages inside the app. So this is a common recipe for disaster. You use WebView, you define a JavaScript interface, now you load code from the internet and run it, but you load it in an insecure way, with either unencrypted HTTP or with bad HTTPS. And then, if you target old versions of Android, now you might be able to use JavaScript from the web, which anybody can inject into the page while you're loading it, and then run code on the phone. So this is a 2012 vulnerability that showed that the Android API, before API 17, did not restrict this message, so JavaScript could be turned into Java and run on the phone. All right. Now, another thing you can do, which we saw in that File Explorer app, is you could just have a listening port. If I run netstat -pant on my Android phone, I see the listening ports, and there are various things listening on various ports, and each of these might possibly be doing something unwise on those ports, like we saw that ES File Explorer is just serving up all your photos to anybody with no password on one of those ports. All right, your messaging applications can be vulnerable. This was pretty hilarious with the last Windows phone that came out about 8 years ago. There was a text message of death that would just kill your phone that people were sending around. And this happens frequently. So all these things that take messages from other devices can have flaws and exploits through there. So if you want to find these things, you have to download all the installed apps, decompile them, or unpack them to see the source code, look for vulnerabilities, or you can use Drozer's scanner modules, which I was not very impressed when I tried them. For example, I tried the SQL injection scanner, and it did not find a vulnerability in Civ, which we know had a SQL injection in it. So, by the way, that's true of all vulnerability scanners. Phone scanners, when tested, have a 50% chance of finding the vulnerability they're designed to find. They're not very good as a class. Although that test was maybe 5 or 8 years ago, they might have gotten better, but I highly doubt it, because a vulnerability scanner is not very smart. It just has certain code. It tries to inject a string, which will trigger the vuln under normal conditions, and if it's a little bit different than that, it won't find it. So, remote exploits are ones that work over the internet from somewhere far away, so you can install malware on the phone. A local exploit is something that operates on the phone, so once you have put another app on the phone and you have some foothold, then you try to escalate your privileges. This is the same thing you do in any attack. First you get the ability to run some kind of code on the box, then you escalate your privilege to get more power once you have some control of the box. All right, and so there's attack tools. Ettercap is the one they talk about in the book, which someone was putting in the chat. This is the standard tool everyone talks about for man-in-the-middle attacks by ARP poisoning, but I've never been able to make it work on any environment, so I use other tools instead. There is one called Ettercap that is supposed to be better. Burp, of course, we use all the time here. Does fantastic man-in-the-middle attacks with fake HTTPS certificates and all kinds of advanced features. It's difficult to add a trusted certificate to modern versions of Android, although not impossible. I thought of putting it in the project, so I think it's not there yet, but it can be done. It's no longer very easy, though. All right, and this is the warning. Android Nougat no longer trusts users who had been supplied CA certificates. You can install the certificate, but you have to install it directly in the operating system. All right, now Burp has extensions inside Burp, and I've used quite a few of them, and several of them are very good. You can supposedly add your own custom Python code here, but when I tried to go through a tutorial, it didn't work. This Python scripter, none of even their examples would work. So I don't know what the deal is. It might have something to do with Python 2 moving to Python 3. But, you know, I ran out of energy and I ran out of motivation, because you can just write a Python script yourself. If you can write Python, you don't even need burp. It's pretty easy to just write Python. It'll do anything burp does anyway. So I'd say if an extension is not handy that makes it easier to do something in burp, just write Python. It's quite easy to duplicate the features in Python. Anyway, Drozer has an infrastructure mode with a command and control server and rogue agents. So this is like Metasploit. You can take over phones and remote control them. I haven't done this, but in principle you could. All right. And so there are some interesting privilege levels for apps to run on. There's this thing called without context. If you are running on a non-system app that is not running with system privileges, then you might not have much privilege. Oh, good. I saw a little delay there, but it went away. Hopefully it won't be too bad. I limited the bandwidth of my OBS, and it seems to make it run better through this miserable Comcast internet. Anyway, so if you compromise an app, you now have the privileges of the compromised app. But if you don't have what's called context, then you cannot use Java libraries or install packages or anything like that, where you can only reach a part of the file system that app's user account can reach. But there is another situation where you have context, and now you can do anything the app can do, giving you more privilege than the last one. You can use any of the privileges that app was given. Remember, it says this app can access the internet, this app can access the phone, the camera, and so on. And then, of course, there's system apps where you have more higher privileges. So when you install a package, it can ask for any permissions from the user, and the user can grant them as long as they don't have a protection level that requires a signature the app doesn't have. And so if you have ADB shell access, you can install apps or interact as a developer. And then there is system user, which is what we've got on our Genymotion emulator. We have a pound as the prompt, indicating we're running as root on the Android system, and now you can do essentially anything. You can reach into anybody's directory, you can reach into every user's files and see them and change the device configuration, and so on. And then there's root user, which is even higher, where you can manipulate any aspect of the device. And I think that's what we actually have on our emulator. Yeah, the system user is not quite the same as the root user. But anyway, those are the levels. All right, and I've got some Cahoots, which is 128, chapter 8a. Let's see how they look. All right. Right. Okay, guess that's it. All right, if you want a custom update function, what permission do you need? That's it, install packages. Oh, I see a question. Why was Flash vulnerable? You know, I don't really know. I think it just had the usual stuff, code injection, buffer overflows and such. It had an endless series of flaws, though. They never seemed to patch them. There always seemed to be more behind them until everybody just gave up and got rid of it. All right, what class allows an app to load new code at runtime? Yep, there you go. Good. Text class loader. All right, and what filter is required to let an app open URLs like POEM? I see somebody's making trouble. All right, that's browsable. All right, and which component lets a web page execute Java code? All right. All right, that's web views. All right. Seth will probably have to tell me who they are, and that will definitely have to tell me who they are. Felipe might be a real name, though. Seth might be a real name, too. All right. So, all right, and I just want to say a couple things about projects. Well, I think I'll stop recording and make a separate video.